Initare means giving thanks to the all, giving thanks to the divine. Nature is the essence of nature. Masheru Nefer, that means good evening in Metanetter. I'm Queen Mother Initare, Auset, Akua, KitiHeru, with the Temple of Het-Heru, where our founder is Baba Saba Amari Sneferu. And you're listening to the voices of Maat in St. Louis, Missouri. I want to do our Hesi, our chant. I'll say that in Metanetter, and then I will translate it into English. Pa netter ampu pa Maat, Ank wise the jeb, Ank unja seneb, Uben nefer akar pa inbu haru. In English, it translates to how sweet is the truth, life, power, stability, life, prosperity, and health, rising always in divine excellence with Ma'at every day, all day. Ashe. And family, when I say Ashe, it simply means that we agree and we're on the same accord. So tonight's show is called Healing Among the Elders and the Youth. I want to say Duwa'u to our Queen Kendra, who actually inspired this show from our last show, which was the Crisis, Respect Crisis, Voices of My episode 20. So Duwa'u to you, lovely Queen Kendra. I appreciate all of your help with this and your idea. Ashe?
Ashe.
Okay. Healing is the process of making sound or healthy again. It's therapeutic in a spiritual aspect. It can be defined as the direct interaction between one individual, the healer, and a second individual, which is the sick, with the intention of bringing about an improvement to the illness. However, in the African method, our goal is to provide an ongoing, everlasting bond of inspiration, love, trust, and unity amongst the elders and youth in our KitiHeru. KitiHeru means Black people community. Ashe?
Ashe.
And with that being said, I'm going to allow my special guests to introduce themselves, tell us what you want us to know about you. And also for this particular show, I'm going to ask that you tell the audience your age. So go right ahead.
All right, I'll begin. First of all, Maat Hotep to everyone. I'm pleased to be here. My name is Jacoby Connor. I'm the son of Everline and Ricky Connor. I'm currently 26 years old, a member of the African Village, a member of Sabaye, also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. I love learning and I love teaching combined. My current mission right now in life is to accelerate the adoption of financial literacy in the Black community. And I really love what you all are doing with this show. I think it's beautiful and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you again. And yeah, Ashe, I'm ready to talk solutions.
All right, Ashe, Ashe. Ashe. I like that fire in you, young king. That's what we need. Go right ahead, Queen.
Uncle Johnson, my name is Kendra Tatum. I am the founder of Social Value Consciousness. It is an organization that facilitates discussions with children and young adults around colorism. For those who don't know, they may also know it as skin tone bias or shadism. We also talk about texturism or hair discrimination, as well as voluptuous bias, also known as body shaming. I am 30 years old, and yeah, I'm a member of Sabaye as well.
Ashe, Ashe. Go right ahead.
Uncle Job Saneb, that's a greeting term in the Kemetic language of Medu Nater. It simply means life. I bid you life, prosperity, and good health. Uncle Job Saneb, my name is Baba Saba Amari Sneferu. I'm a Pan-African Garveyite and Kemetic Saber, dedicated to the resurrection of African people and dedicated to the resurrection of African spirituality. I am honored to be a guest on the show. I think this is my second show. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be
second
correct.
Show. And beloved Queen Mother Initare invited me to be a part of this discussion. I said we're more than qualified. We have more than qualified individuals to do the show. And she insisted that I play a part in this show. I'm 61 years old. And I look forward to working on healing the bond between the younger generation and the older generation. Because of course, we are not going anywhere until we get that fixed.
Ashe, Ashe. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the questions. And what I'll do is I'll call on the next individual so that we won't be on top of each other. So the first person that's gonna go is gonna be the Queen. And then from there, I'll move on. So Queen, the question is, what age difference qualifies a wise person to be considered an elder in your mind? 10 years, 20 years older, 30 years older than yourself?
Let's see. So I would say that, so I'll show people who are older than me respect in general, but I would say the elder would be more so be about 30 years older, because I'm thinking of someone that's 60, 70, 80 years of age.
Okay, that would be considered an elder for you?
Yes.
Ashe. All right, King Jacoby, what about you? What age difference qualifies a wise person to be considered your elder? 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years older than yourself?
Right, so I would actually agree with Queen Kendra. I would say for me, 30 years. I think younger generations, it might be more than that. But I would say that I think that being classified as an elder is more than just age. I feel like it's also based on like having a meaningful life experience and just wisdom that they can share.
Ashe. All right, Baba say, but what about you? What qualifies a wise person to be, you consider to be an elder? 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would consider a wise person to be an elder. I would set that bar at about 20 years, because my father is about 20 years older than I am.
Ashe.
And I would set it there 20 years and higher. Like you say, like the young man said, that put a lot of emphasis on wise, because there's a lot of folks out there who, not necessarily their fault, but, because of, America, the Western indoctrination and all of the ramification that comes along with that. People reach their level of consciousness at different ages. A close friend of ours said that he didn't really become conscious until he was 71 years old. So it doesn't matter which age it takes for you to arrive there, because we all on a different journey, just so long as you get there. But I would say 20 years older.
Ashe, Ashe. So the second question, and then I'm gonna have Baba, you take this first, you'll be first for the second question. Do you feel that there is a communication gap or a perception of a communication gap, or perhaps both, when it comes to the Black youth and the Black elders? And would you explain your answer?
Well, I would say both, quote unquote, my big brother, President General of the Universal African Peoples Organization, Zaki Baruti, one of the things I would always remember him was saying is that perception is everything. And, everybody, that question brings to mind a man that I knew years ago. He was a Vietnam vet. And at the time, this is way before I got married, I was dating his daughter. And when I would visit him, because I really liked the guy, but it was like he was stuck in a time capsule.
Mm.
He had been through Vietnam, and his whole vibration was like in the early 70s. He's just there. And I would notice that some of his peers, not military veterans, but just people in his age group, they sort of looked at him sideways a little bit, but I never disrespected him because I knew what he went through. But he was stuck in that time capsule, and I can see how that would be an issue in terms of the current generation being able to communicate and relate to him, because he was really locked in by the experiences or the traumatic experiences that, they had a lot of drug abuse over there. They had a lot of, when you have to literally kill people, that's what you are when you're a soldier, you're a professional killer. That there's a lot of psychological trauma that comes along with going through that process. And so I felt for the brother, and I visited his house. If you go in his house, he had black light posters, just the smell of the incense, everything was stuck in a time capsule. And so other than that, I would say on the part of the elder generation, you have to really put forth the effort to try to stay current as best you can. My biological father, he's familiar with texting, and he takes the extra step to kind of keep up with technology. But a lot of people of his generation just throw their hands up and just go the other way. So I would say yes, there's a disconnect, and sometimes it's a bitter disconnect, but we really can do some things to make that better if we really try.
Ashe, did you want to expound on at least one that you think that can possibly change that?
Well, I know that your final question probably is something similar to what we can do.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll deal with that on the last question then.
Okay.
So the next person up, that would be you, King Jacoby. Would you like me to repeat the question?
You can repeat the question.
Okay. Do you feel that there is a communication gap or a perception of that gap, or perhaps both, when it comes to Black youth and Black elders?
Right. So I think there is both, but I also think that the communication gap is actually the bigger issue, because I think that the communication gap is actually what causes the perception gap. Because if we can't really communicate how we feel and our actual intentions to both sides, then the perception will be off and there will be misunderstanding. So yeah, I think that the communication gap is the bigger issue, but there's definitely both gaps.
Mm-hmm. So when you communicate with an elder, you said, I believe, that you thought that the elder was 30 years, to be 30 years older than you. When you communicate with an elder and say you guys are having maybe a misunderstanding, or there is some type of something that's not really gelling, how would you handle that?
Well, I just continue to, I guess, communicate the misunderstanding. So basically, when I talk and I understand that there's I don't want to keep using the same word, but misunderstanding, or we're not on the same page.
Right.
I like to see it from their angle and really just try to talk about where we're not seeing eye to eye on. And yeah, just thinking of the solution. That's all I'm about when I'm talking to anyone.
Ashe.
And
right.
can I make a response to him before you go?
Go right ahead.
Before you leave him?
Sure.
Your comments kind of reminded me of a conversation I had with my own son. And I actually had my son when I was almost 39 years old. And so there's a big gap for most parents, and their children. But we were having a conversation, and he made the statement that you don't even know me. Now, this is why I talk about perception. In my mind, I was like, I know you better than you know yourself. So in my mind, I really feel I know you extremely well, but in his mind, that's why I say it's something going on with the perception. I'm perplexed at what's going on in the mindset of the generation that makes them feel that we don't know you. You know, when I really think I do. But you know, it's something going on where this is so clear of a disconnection that I really would like to hear somebody explain that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. Now, before I really answer it, I want to explain that I definitely can't speak for my entire generation or even any certain situations. But I would say on that, from the other standpoint, it is kind of the thought of one person can't really fully understand somebody else's life better than they do, because your son in this case, had his own life experiences, along with, of course, you were there all through his childhood, but he spends 8 hours a day at school usually, or every child usually spends 8 hours a day at school, and that's another experience in its own. And then when you go into college, it's a completely new experience there as well. So everybody has their own different life trials, things they're going through personally. And so, yeah, I can see the other side, but yeah, that's, I wouldn't necessarily feel that way about my father. I mean, I feel that he doesn't know everything, that I, feel, or, because, you don't tell everybody everything that you're going through. So yeah, I can definitely see both sides there, but I think the father figure, or really the parent role, would know a lot about their child than anybody else besides their child, besides the
So
individual
you would say a
child.
little bit in the middle, pretty much.
Yeah, I can see both. So I can see why he would feel that. I mean, you don't. I wouldn't say like you don't even know him. But that may have been a little of an overstatement.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely probably parts of his life that he hasn't shared, or feels like you wouldn't understand.
Right. Or you don't
Thank you.
know all
Appreciate
of me.
Right. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Do I? All right, Queen Kendra, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
I will. Do you feel that there is a communication gap or a perception gap, or perhaps both, when it comes to the youth, the Black youth and the Black elders?
Yes, so I agree with Baba Saba when he says that perception is everything. There's definitely a communication gap. There's definitely a gap in general, communication and perception wise. So I also want to take the caveat that King Jacoby made as far as not speaking for my entire generation. But I know for me personally, for some situations, it depends on the relationship between the elder or parent, kind of going back to what we were just speaking about, and that child. So, has trauma occurred? Has any abuse occurred? Has abuse of finances, verbal abuse, physical abuse? That adds to the gap. In addition, I know sometimes for me, I don't realize how similar the times have been. So I'll think that there's a huge difference in what I'm going through versus what the elder is going through, until I realize, no, a lot of the conversations that we're having now have already been taking place. Whether it's something that's as extreme as, I'm dealing with school shootings, or we're dealing with, in this generation, transgender sexuality. I think that sometimes young people assume that there's no way you could understand what I'm coming from. There must be a gap. But when I think about the fact that a lot of these narratives have been going on historically for a much longer time. So I think part of it is the young person's tendency to think that, oh, all of this is new. And it's not. So that's one side to it. Yeah, and just oof. And then if the older individual or the elder comes off and seems, where they come off as if they're disappointed in the young person, They feel as if they should know better. I think if the young person takes on that disappointment, that'll also make the gap even larger, because then that person feels hurt. They don't feel as comfortable in coming to that person and saying that they need help. So all of these things add to the gap, but it's for sure a gap there.
Ashe. That was a good point you made, Queen. And also probably has something to do with it may be the same issue, but it may have been done, or it may have happened in a different way. But I think like the key element of whatever the situation that the youth may be going through, the elder may have went through it, but it's still different because, you know, there's still two individual persons, right? So the elder might have had that certain experience, but then the youth is like, no, that's not, no, you don't understand, you know. But with that being said, I just feel like you were saying about the elders being like very disappointed or coming across as, you know, like, I can't believe you've done that. You know, we need to assert ourselves in the way where it won't come across as judging or just basically listening and not really giving advice up front. Just listen first. And then maybe if they ask advice, it may be a different outcome. Ashe?
Ashe.
Okay, we're gonna move on to question 3. And King Kobe, you're gonna be first on this. Have you ever rejected important advice from an elder? If so, why? And how did that situation work out for you?
That's a good question. And I actually can't think of an instance where I actually went against advice from an elder. Well, all my life I had brilliant elders just at my side, in my support circle. And I mean, I was blessed with that, honestly. So I've always took their advice to heart. But I also feel like a person, they will make their own decision. I feel like people need to understand the decision that they make. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend taking blind advice, but you know, if it's an elder giving you advice, most likely, or at least the elders I know, will always be good advice. But yeah, I feel like nobody understands their life more than them. So the individual person, they have to also reevaluate it themselves and make the right decision.
Ashe. What about you, Queen Kendra? Have you ever rejected important advice from an elder? If so, can you explain the situation to us and how the outcome went?
Yes. Okay. So, man, oh gosh, I knew this question's gonna be difficult.
Take your time. Take your time.
Okay. So I had my background is in social service, in nonprofit work in general, but social services, connecting people to resources, as well as community organizing. So I've done anti-police brutality organizing, anti-government surveillance, a number of things, increasing minimum wage and living wage for individuals, different projects. And so, but at times I've worked for organizations that were very toxic, and kind of goes back to this whole conversation around elders, because I was working with an elder. She had a tendency to harp on the negative or only tell me what I was doing wrong. So I wanted to leave that job. So at one point I consulted another elder, and he told me it wasn't time yet. Now, some time went by first, but I did eventually leave that job because there were ongoing sexual harassment issues. So on one hand, yeah, another elder gave me the advice not to leave. On the other hand, by the second round of sexual harassment issues, I just couldn't take it anymore. Yeah. So the situation worked out really, I mean, fair, I guess 50-50, fairly poorly in some ways. At the same time, I was very liberated. I felt very liberated, but this happened a couple of years ago, so I do still question how I left and what I would have done differently. But I mean, the circumstances that surrounded the whole event were quite difficult in general, though.
Ashe, Ashe. Hey, Baba Saber, the same question for you. Have you ever rejected important advice from an elder? If so, why and how did that situation work out for you?
Yes, I did. You know, as a young man, you know, I always say this because I remember how I had this great epiphany when I turned 30 years old. I said, it took me to the age of 30 before I realized how little I really knew. You know, I guess from 18 to 29, I really had an arrogance of really thinking I knew everything. I would never admit it at the time, but you know, in hindsight, looking back, I really thought that I knew everything. And it was the age of 30 before I realized, you know, I learned enough to know that I didn't know, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a
And
long time. You said from 18 to 30. You
yeah,
thought
that's
you
like
knew
12
everything.
years. But it was a lot. Pretty much thought I walked with the swagger as though I knew everything. And
I
a lot
got
of times, I didn't have the benefit like Jacoby, who I didn't counsel elders, and there was a disconnect in the generation in the relationship I had with my parent. Even though I had a decent relationship with my father, but it wasn't one that we talked about personal things,
Ashe.
and it didn't get a lot of advice because maybe you guys, when you say 30 years is a good age range. My parents had children at a very young age. They had three. They had three children. My father had three children by the age of 21.
Wow.
My mother was 20, and so they
Mm.
were very young parents. And so they were living their life and making their mistakes while we were young. And so at some point, there is a disconnection when sometimes the busyness of a parent, whether it be work related or social dating or what have you, whatever. Like, in other words, when I was a young teenager, my father, you know, my mother transitioned at an early age. And my father, getting married and then divorced, he went through some dating of his own in his 30s. And so while he was going to work and dating as well, there was a gap there, you know. So I grew up in that gap. And as a result, there was a time when I was around 24, 25. And once again, I was dating. And this was after I had left California. I had become conscious. I had learned a lot about the struggle. And there's a thin line between being confident and almost being a narcissist. You know, I learned about how sisters are struggling. They have children without fathers. And when I came back to St. Louis, almost felt like a superhero. I dated women who had children. And my uncle and his wife, my aunt, they advised me that that's not a good idea, you know, because I didn't have any children at the time. They said, that's not a good idea. And I really thought they were wrong. And my uncle then expressed to me why he felt that way. He said, well, each one of those children, they have a father, if not the same father. And then that woman has a past with that man or those men. And I know that you don't think it's a big deal, but it's probably going to be a bigger deal than you realize. And I wouldn't say that it was a major issue, but I would say that they were right in that advice. Not necessarily saying there's anything wrong with a single Black man who's conscious dating a woman with children. There's nothing wrong with that. But they were my advocates. See, a lot of times they're not really meaning any harm to the person on the other side of the equation. But they were my advocates trying to suggest the best thing for my life. And I was kind of dismissive, but I smiled and smirked about it, and, you know, sort of like I know what I'm doing. But in the final analysis, their advice was correct. You know, the relationship did not last. It lasted about maybe 2 years, a year and a half. But it came to the end because there were some issues that there was an imbalance that could not be overcome. So I would say, yes, it happened to me before.
Ashe. So we're going to move on to we're on question 4. And Queen Kendra, you're going to go first, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
When communicating across generations, should you adjust your communication style, or is changing your personal style of talking unnecessary? What do you think?
I think one should change their communication style. I think that is similar to any other situation in life where the way I speak to my sisters or my girlfriends is different than the way I speak to my coworkers and my boss. It's even different than the way I would speak to the local grocery store worker. So there is an adjustment that you make in order to show more respect, in order to be more conservative in that conversation, in your mannerisms and things of that sort. So yes, I think that one should really take into account the way they're coming off and speaking to the other person when you're speaking to an elder.
Ashe. Okay, Baba Saber, what about you?
Repeat the question again.
When communicating across generations, should you adjust your communication and style, or is changing your personal style of talking unnecessary?
Well, I think Queen Kendra was correct in some of the things she was saying, as far as you should be, strategic, basically, when it comes to communicating, because you do communicate differently with different people. But what I think we need to do a better job at is making the judgment on when that's appropriate. I remember having debates years ago with some friends and relatives about should you treat your children as a friend, because there was a question where the debate was, well, if you treat your children as a friend, then they will come to you with their problems. I was on the side of the debate saying that I don't think you should do that. It's okay for them not to come to you with every problem. There's some problems that should be reserved for their friends and their peers. And I don't want to be everything to my child. I want to have a parent-child relationship. I want there to be a difference in how I communicate and the type of things you discuss with me. And so, with that said, I do think that it's important for you to be strategic and even if you have to temper the way you discuss, because we all do it. People talk a certain way. When you go to church, you don't use profanity. We make adjustments all the time. When you take a business call, you sound a certain way, but it's a respect issue. When you respect the individual, say of another generation, you should be cognizant of how they would feel if you talk to them in certain tones and attitudes. But on the flip side, I see this frequently, that a lot of times an elder will not consider a young person's emotions in terms of how they perceive, how they speak to them. They think that you should tolerate, because I'm older, you should just tolerate however I speak to you. And so, yes, I think that should be done. And when I speak to young people, if I see a young person on the street doing something inappropriate, or a next door neighbor, my neighbor has 7 children and 3 boys and 4 girls. And if I saw one of the boys doing something, there are times that I've given them advice or told them to do something. But I always show a loving spirit when I'm speaking with them. Mm. I don't speak to them, even some of the guys that's 30 and 40 years old in the neighborhood, they show a respect for me. I don't try to talk as though I'm in their generation. But they show, some of a young guy might say, Mr. Don or Mr. Amari, or even people that don't know him might say OG, but they always show a level of respect. And I like that difference in generation, because I think you can be more effective if you stay in your lane and communicate from your perspective.
Ashe. All right, King Kobe. When communicating across generations, should you adjust your communication style, or is changing your personal style uh, of talking unnecessary? How do you feel about that? What do you think?
Right. I definitely agree with what has been said so far. Like Baba Saber said about just respect, I think it's just based off of respect. Um, Communication styles differ from person to person, and some people can't change it, even if, well, or they don't think about it enough to change, or they may not feel it is disrespectful. But I feel like disrespect comes into like tone and word choice. So those things should be edited on the younger generation side. I don't feel elders need to change their way of talking in any way. I mean, they're the elders. We will listen. Period on that. But I also feel like it should also, the respect should also be reciprocated, regardless of the age difference. As Queen Kendra said when she told the story about the elder at her job that basically only looked at the negative side of things. Um, that's not what we need. That's not necessarily disrespect, but that's a way of communicating. If you're only talking about negative things, I feel like the Black youth have enough negativity going against everything that we have to go through. So we need positivity coming from elders, along with constructive criticism and things like that, of course.
Ashe, Ashe. I just want to add and say that I think it depends on your environment and how you're raised sometimes too, because I've had situations where I have a friend and in her home, cussing was acceptable, no matter how old you were. You know, you could, it was the way that they communicated in their household. Um, but I had to explain to her that when she come around my mom and my father, she was not going to do that, because that's not what we do. I respect what you do at your house, but this is what we do at our house.
Mhm.
And so, but the way that she was raised, the way that she was taught to communicate, that was necessarily okay, because that's the way she communicated, then it was a challenge when she would have to go into another environment or go into school and have the same, have respect and watch what you say. You know, when you see an elder coming, if you say a cuss word, you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you." And you made sure, you see what I'm saying, that elder did not hear negative things coming from your mouth. And so I think sometimes it depends on how you're raised, what you're taught, and the life skills of that nature that kind of determines where you're going to be with that level of communication, and whether you feel like you should have to switch who you are, because there is an elder person present. Okay, let's move
That's right.
on to anybody else have anything on question 4? Okay, we're going to move on to 5. And King Jacoby, you're going to be first. Under what circumstances, if any, should the young generation lead the older generation?
All right. This is also a great question.
Like
So
that
I
one,
would say
like that, I can tell.
it's very thought provoking. But I would say any circumstance situation where the younger person has more experience or understanding than the elder. Now, that's not many circumstances and not many situations. But one example would be technology. So I know that like our children are introduced at a very young age and quickly adapt to its utilization. And technology has many benefits for elders, but many elders are actually against it. So in some situations within technology, some technologies that can benefit elders have to do with like in healthcare or just convenience with self-driving cars, apps like Instacart that where they can deliver it to you, so our elders don't have to drive out. In those ways, we can show how technology can benefit our elders. So I would say I would consider that like leading in that front.
Mhm. Did you say that many elders are against technology? Tell me a little bit more
Um,
about. What you mean against?
Yeah, and maybe I should put an asterisk around many, because I know some elders that are not, but I know a few elders in my family, when bringing up self-driving cars, they're a bit scared. So I would I would like to lead and explain how self-driving cars are actually safer, or will be safer than human drivers, because instead of two eyes that we have that look the same way, self-driving cars have multiple eyes or cameras and radar sensors that's looking every direction and in blind spots all at the same time. But yeah, self-driving cars, when you hear that, it's just such a wild thought. A lot of people get scared and they feel like it'll just take over and crash or something, or just dealing with. I remember when Wi-Fi was first introduced to the mass population, a lot of people weren't well. Yeah, I think there was just controversy around like radio waves and all of that in the air, and I knew many elders that weren't wanting to deal with that. So yeah, those are a few examples.
Right, right. Ashe. Thanks for explaining, Dua, for explaining that. Okay, Baba Saber, you're next on question 5. Under what circumstances, if any, should our young youth lead the older generation?
Yeah, I think King Jacoby was right on point. That's exactly what I was going to recommend. That in the area of technology, I think they have a better grip on that aspect of our reality today. Also, when it comes to navigating social media issues, I think they're probably, I'm no probably to it. They are a way more adapt to that, more advanced than that, and they should lead. However, no matter what situation, whenever you're in a group, whoever has the most talent, whoever is blessed with the most gifts, then they should lead in that area. There's no automatic leadership that should be ordained to you because of your age. We're cheating ourselves out of enormous amount of talent and gifts that our younger generation can bring to the table. But at the same time, you don't completely omit the elders. There are always things that they can contribute. But I think the elders need to probably learn how to, interject and when is appropriate to interject. And so once we and I think dialogue is the most important thing. When we talk more, we start to change. Just this conversation in itself, you have to bring a certain amount of humility to this conversation. And I can feel the humility in both young individuals, that's on the panel. And I'm humbling myself in spirit because this is work. This is not just a fun conversation. This is something that has to be figured out. And I think dialogue is the most important thing that we moving forward as the best tool that we have to kind of fix this stuff. And humility has to be brought in the spirit of each individual when we sit down and start talking to you, cross generations. In other words, leave the arrogance at the door, and we can probably make a lot of progress.
Ashe, I wanted to ask Baba Saber, just to get a little bit more deeper into this particular question. Let's take the protest, for example. I know that some youth have spoken with me personally about how disappointed they were with some of the elders when it came to the protest, because the youth felt a certain type of way, the elders, felt a certain type of way as far as what should be done, what shouldn't be done, how things should happen, how things should unfold, where we should be in the protest as opposed to not. And so as an elder in our community, Baba Saber, do you feel like in some of the protests, depending on where they are, if the youth has enough experience and if the youth seems to be sensible and rational, but at the same time getting the mission done, Do you feel like that the elder and youth should communicate to a point where they might be able to lead a protest depending on what the situation is or was at the time? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think Queen Kendra kind of made a good point that would be appropriate to this, to this particular aspect of the conversation. When she said that some young people feel that because they're going through it now, and the power and the energy and the passion that they're experiencing now, that this thing is new. And I think that might cloud the perception a little bit. There's
Okay.
no way that what I'm going through with this Mike Brown thing and how they killed him, he was on the ground for, laying there for that length of time. And my outrage, that this has never happened before. And so with that passion and energy, there may be a loss of perception. And that could lead to a disconnect. With that said, we have to understand in the big picture that all progressive movements have been led by young people.
Ashe.
But even in the civil rights movement, there were always elders that gave advice in the background. Even when you look at the civil rights movement, Dr. King had elders all around him. But the key difference is elders have to recognize talent. If a person has a particular skill in mobilization, if they have oratory skills and they have the passion to draw crowds and to be an effective communicator, you have to recognize that talent and prop that talent up so that for the betterment of the whole group, so that we can move forward. We can't fall in love with the movement to the point where we think it belongs to us, that we're in competition with each other for our voices to be heard. There's something that we're lacking some meetings in there somewhere. We're going to the streets to make a protest, but we don't necessarily have the same narrative, and so that's where dialogue has to take place. We have to have more intergenerational dialogue.
Yes.
On all levels, whether it be personal, whether it be family, or whether it be in terms of the movement.
Ashe. And I also kind of feel that you're also speaking of a balance.
Absolutely.
A really healthy balance. Ashe. All right, Queen Kendra, under what circumstances, if any, should the young generation lead the elder generation? What do you think?
Okay, so I was definitely going to bring up the Ferguson protest.
Go ahead.
I think so. My answer to that question is more so to walk hand in hand. So kind of along the lines of balance. So I remember, one organization, I believe it was called Hands Up, Don't Shoot. Really, they're having a particular meeting, like on a particular day. The issues between the youth and the elders just seemed to explode. And it just felt awful, that both sides seemed so offended. And I wanted to see people walk more hand in hand because there was definitely advice we needed and guidance that we needed. And kind of not almost, for lack of a better term, temperance, as far as in order to be more strategic, that the young people needed. And I think that the older people needed to kind of, based on what I was saying before, show up with less judgment. Because I know, even in me personally, I've had elders in my family say that they didn't agree with what I did for a living. They didn't agree with the things I was passionate about because Black movements were against God, because they didn't include all people. They weren't a universal movement, that type of rhetoric. Because my family is mainly, it's very religious, especially the older people in my family. So it's that type of communication style that then causes one side to shut down. And so just the importance of walking hand in hand, though, not even getting caught up in titles, but just knowing that the work needs to be done. Because there are times where, yes, you may be, someone else may be the stronger, for lack of a better term, leader, or the stronger go-to person because they have more experience in that area, but it's going to shift. You know, it's constantly going to shift. So being willing to take a back seat when needed, and also being willing to take the stage when needed as well, so that the mission is carried out as strategically and as concisely as possible.
Can I make a short, quick,
go right ahead, Baba Saber.
In reference to the Mike Brown protest, there was a moment in the protest, because things were happening very fast, where there was a group, because there were many small factions. There was one particular group that made the statement that if you over 30, I don't trust you. And whoever was peddling that idea, they were saying it with a lot of energy and passion. And I was really disappointed because I knew that that wasn't new at all. That was said back in the 60s. And so we have to be careful about, there's always enemies who are putting things in a lexicon that we will bite on because it feels good and sounds good, and then we'll use it, but it's actually counter-revolutionary. And I felt almost helpless when I saw the energy and how often they repeated that. And it was almost a deliberate and almost happy to have a wedge between the generations. And they don't know that was they didn't realize that was counter-revolutionary, and that we had actually seen that before in the 60s. But it really came from the hippie movement. The hippie movement was saying that we don't trust anybody over 30. And I was like, that's not an original thing you're saying. But how do you fix these things that come up at critical moments in a movement where we need to make sure that we're on the same page when we move forward? Those are the kind of things that we probably need to have conferences over and start to analyze if we want to be serious about being successful instead of just making noise. We're really going to have to do some critical thinking in terms of how we move when it comes to protests and activism.
Yes, I agree. I think my concern is that a lot of those who using that rhetoric with that much passion that you can't trust people over 30 is behind that sounds like trauma to me. It sounds like some pain, some form of pain. I know me personally, I have been financially abused by parental figures, literally had a lawsuit against me by my great aunt. So my point in saying that is I think that sometimes people have experienced trauma and pain, and then they are reapplying it to another situation, and then what the real issue is that they're just hurting. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that could have been the case as well, especially when you're saying something like that with passion. I mean, I never think it's that. Sometimes I don't think it's just that one situation that's causing that person to say something like that.
That's a great point, Queen. It's a great point. Anybody else want to expound on that, or are we moving on to question 6? Okay, so Baba Saber, you're first for question 6. Are today's negative attitudes toward the older generation justified? Or are these attitudes biased by the more vocalized victims of, as Queen Kendra just mentioned, childhood trauma?
I think Queen Kendra's comments was probably a perfect segue into this question.
Ashe, look at the ancestors.
The question is, what is the proportion of people that feel that way? And then you can't think about that question without looking at the amount of single parent families in our communities. And what is the impact of this issue that has not really been resolved in terms of the amount of fathers who are actually in the home? And what impact is that having on the men, you know, not to mention the sisters, you know, is your distrust for the elder generation related to your personal experience? Like I say, your trauma. How many times were you disappointed when you thought dad was gonna come pick you up, you know, in these you know, these families that are separated, and he didn't show up? And what was your emotions behind that? How do you carry that, you know, in terms of your adulthood? You know, so the question is, how many people are affected this way, and has that become the norm in terms of this energy, this feeling? And if so, how do we begin to remedy that? How do you fix that? You know, if it's a generational problem, you know, where we don't have fathers in the homes. I know that you got father support organization that was working hard and trying to rebond men to their responsibilities and to their children, regardless of whether or not you can make the relationship with the, you know, the ex-girlfriend or the ex-wife, yeah, whether you can patch that or not. There's a level of responsibility that comes with being a father, and there's a pride that comes with being a father that you have to take seriously, or it's going to have a devastating impact on that generation. So these are the things that we as a people are going to have to, I mean, there has been a lot of serious conversations about this, but we need to start to see changes in terms of what is our priority in terms of marriage. I'm a big advocate of marriage. You know, you don't have to have a perfect marriage to respect the institution of marriage. You know, I think Brother Kaba was a kind of extreme. This most time he's not, but he was extreme. Somebody asked him the question uh, about love in marriage in terms of his wife. He responded by saying, "What love got to do with it?" I think that was an extreme response, but what he was saying is that I made a commitment. I made a commitment, and I raised a family. That's huge. That's huge to me. And so with that it ain't about just me. It's about this whole next generation that we're producing. So it's not about my selfish, oh, I don't love you the way I used to, so I'm gonna leave. You know, I disagree with that. I think it's much bigger than you. And when you love your people, you can see that really clear. So yeah, that's definitely something we need to take a closer look at.
Shay, I just wanted to make a quick comment on what you said, Baba Saber, about how we can remedy that. One of the ways I think is that when you don't have a father in the home, or you know, even a mother, I know that I have took on the role of being what we call sometimes in the community as a play mama. You know, we need some more play daddies. In the sense that when young men have not been able to experience what it means to be a responsible man and take responsibilities and be accountable for those things, if there is an absent father, and just say that this particular young man doesn't have any positive role models, well, then maybe a neighbor can take up the slack. You know, or maybe someone that's introduced to him that's positive in school. So we always want to look to, just because it's not the biological parent, of course, we know that there are others that can step in and not, of course, take the place of the father, but definitely be there to console, to support, and to just, you know, let the young man know that I know I'm not your dad, but I'm here for you if you need me. And this is what you do when you experience this. You don't do this, but you do this. And so I think that's important for us to continue that method as we move forward in our community. Ashe?
Ashe.
Okay, King Jacoby, you take that same question. You want me to repeat it?
I can just expound on it. Well, I first wanted to go back to basically saying the about the younger people that have childhood traumas. I think that our generation in general is quick to vocalize our emotions, whether that's on social media or in person. So, you know, a majority of that, I guess, can, if that's the majority of what our elders are hearing, then they feel that that's the overall sentiment. But I feel differently. I feel like our generation, my generation and younger generations, don't really have any, in general, don't have a negative attitudes towards our elders. There may be some people in younger generations or in mine that have negative attitudes, but I feel like those people just have negative attitudes to everybody. So there are some people like that are just negative people. And just as I don't represent my entire generation when I speak, neither do they. So yeah, I really wouldn't. I don't feel like in general we have any negative attitudes for our elders. And going back to the thing that was mentioned earlier about not trusting someone over 30, um, I personally have never heard somebody say that, at least in my circle. And I've been to protests where there are many people over 30 all working together with us. Um, so yeah, but I know there are people out there that do have that mindset, and you know that's not a good mindset to have. Of course, like I forgot who exactly said it, but just being hand to hand, I feel like that's the that's the way to go with that. Um, so yeah, that's my feeling on it.
Ashe. All right, Queen Kendra, what about you? I know you did kind of talk a little bit earlier about trauma. And so in that sense, today's negative attitude toward the older generation, is it justified, or are these attitudes biased by more vocalized victims of, you know, as we say, childhood traumas that may have occurred?
I think it's all the above. I think it's in situations where a person has been verbally, financially, or physically, or even sexually abused, that the distrust of elders is, especially if that an elder is the person that committed the assault, is justifiable. And at times it's not justifiable. Just, you know, depends on the situation. And I think a remedy is, a few examples of remedies would be that the young person, the person that's experienced the trauma, to practice forgiveness, meditate, praying to the ancestors, talking it out, especially people who have had similar experiences. Because Baba Saber kind of mentioned earlier, like, how do we remedy this? And I just wanted to, for viewers, I really wanted to be sure we touched on some remedies just to childhood traumas in general.
Yes.
So, but all of the above, in some situations, definitely, if you know, person is just spoiled, or like King Jacoby was saying, just one of those people who don't like anybody, then you know it's unjustifiable, obviously, and that person just needs to do some self-work, figure out why they are that way.
Right. I also think another remedy would be for the individual to seek counseling and therapy. You know, we sometimes feel like we don't need counseling and therapy because a lot of us are sometimes concerned with, you know, someone getting our business, or we may be shame, or, you know, we may not want to discuss it at all. But a lot of times when you have those hidden traumas, or those traumas that really affect you as you get older, you need to revisit that through therapy and through counseling so that you can deal with what's hurting you, or getting that pain out and learning how to deal with the pain. Because I know a few people that experience sexual abuse with older individuals, sometimes that individual never gets dealt with. You know, in some families, it's just a really ugly cycle because that same person can do it over and over again and it's never addressed. And so because it's not addressed, then it becomes this big ugly monster. And everybody that had to experience that is growing up with all of this negativity, this hurt, and this pain. Meanwhile, that individual dies and nothing ever happens. So we really need to deal with it, get the therapy and the counseling that we need so that we can begin to heal ourselves from the inside out. Ashe?
Ashe.
Okay, now moving on to question 7. King Kobe, you're going to be first to answer. Does ego, petty jealousy, or a sense of unharmed entitlement handicap one generation's ability to resolve disputes with one another?
I would say definitely. I think those are all natural human traits that can affect everybody's ability to communicate. But I think that the connection and dialogue between youth and elders are more important than anyone's personal negative feelings or ego. Because I know there's a lot of ego out there with the younger generations. Like Baba Saba meant, a feeling of like they just don't trust anybody that's older. So yeah, if a person does have those feelings, they need to really reevaluate that, put their pride aside, and really try to communicate. Because without that, yeah, it does handicap it. If you have ego issues or if you have entitlement issues, then there's no way you can communicate with somebody that's trying to help.
Ashe. And if you, King Jacoby, just say you had someone that was maybe a friend of yours who was going through that, how do you think you would begin to help them?
You mean they were the one with like a ego issue, or?
Like if they were the ones who were experiencing like an entitlement issue, especially when it came like to an elder, how would you begin to maybe give maybe good advice or help them or give them example of how that would kind of make them feel just a little differently, just to plant a seed?
Yeah, exactly. So when I talk to people, naturally, I like to play quote unquote devil's advocate. I guess I don't like that term, but you always want to question your own thinking. Yeah. So if I feel like one of my peers, their ego is too much or they're entitled, they feel one way really strongly. With the peers, the people that are in my circle, I feel comfortable. I guess not going against them, but sharing another thought that differs from theirs, and then we can talk it out from there. So I just feel like talking it out and showing the other side and points from the other side that maybe they haven't heard, and eventually you can reach a resolution that way.
Ashe, Ashe. Okay, what about you, Queen Kendra, for number 7? Does ego, petty jealousy, a sense of unharmed entitlement handicap one generation's ability to resolve disputes with the other?
Definitely. This kind of even goes into question 8. It's like that's part of the problem of things like ego that can keep an elder from that maybe was the cause of trauma from coming forth, apologizing and mending that relationship. Yes. Or doing whatever they can to mend that relationship. On the same end, petty jealousy, I've experienced working in an environment with other Black women. I've worked for predominantly Black led organizations. They were Black owned, and the staff was predominantly Black. And so I've experienced women, body shaming, basically one of the issues I talk about within my organization. So I've definitely seen petty jealousy come up, or older women seemingly not wanting to mentor me because of an issue of jealousy. And I only will even call it jealousy because other coworkers who were there to observe and could hear what people were saying behind my back called it jealousy. They called it that. So yeah, that definitely stands in the way of progress.
Yes.
And all this time we could be progressive, we could be learning from one another, iron sharpening iron, you teaching me, raise up the next generation of leaders.
Right.
And so it's unfortunate.
Right. Instead of busy hating on each other, we could be busy helping on each other. Ashe. Okay, Baba Saber, same question for you. Do you need me to repeat it? Unmute yourself, Baba Saber.
Go ahead and repeat the question.
Okay, does ego, petty jealousy, or a sense of unharmed entitlement handicap one generation's ability to resolve disputes with the other?
You know, entitlement is something that happens from both ends in many cases. I think a lot of examples, and not all, like I said, we're not talking about the majority, we're talking about the aspect of the community that presents a problem. There are some people, not just young people, that feel that they're entitled, that they don't have to appreciate the things that they have or the things that they've been given or blessed with, or the assistance that somebody may give them. They just think that they're entitled. That's a problem. And then on the other side, there's some elders that feel like, just because I'm an elder, you have to show me respect, even if I don't show you respect. Just because I'm an elder, you better talk to me with respect. And I can call you an MF and whatever, and you still supposed to respect. And so that's a sense of false entitlement. And so these are pathologies, these are schisms that really have to be cleaned up. You know, we're in a tough situation where we're African people living in a European society, and we have to submit to the culture and the rules and the laws of that society. You know, my biological brother Teddy Jabari and I, we used to have a lot of conversations about how to fix problems in the Black community, and sometimes those conversations would get so intense, we would go deeper and deeper and deeper, to the point where we would reach some conclusion that there has to be an interracial martial law system, so to speak, if you really wanted to solve some of our worst problems. But yet you cannot do that in this society because it would be considered illegal. You would get arrested for trying to solve some of these problems. So we're caught in a dilemma where our hands are tied from resolving issues that are tearing us up as a people. And then the schisms that are involved in terms of trying to work them out through dialogue. You have these problems with entitlement issues where people feel that they're owed something they haven't earned. And so I think what we're doing tonight is a very good start. We're having a conversation. I think it's a serious conversation. I hope it doesn't come off as a depressing conversation, because sometimes when you talk about pathologies, it's not really a fun thing to talk about. But we're going to have plenty of fun conversations, but we have to have these important conversations in order to figure out a better way to do it. I think the best start would be to have humility. Both sides have to bring a little bit of humility to the table when we start to have these dialogues.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to question 8. This is our final question. And Queen Kendra, you're going to be first on this. Having been educated to the divide and conquer objectives outlined in the Willie Lynch letter, i.e. pitting the young against the old, what can Black folks do to counter this problem and repair the broken bond between Black youth and elders?
Okay, so I definitely was thinking about the Willie Lynch letter earlier in the conversation, knowing that, all of this has been by design. So that's important to remember, because, both sides are to blame in this current system, but also remembering that the foundation is that it's all by design.
Absolutely.
But what are some remedies? Some things that we've already discussed as far as avoiding getting your ego involved, practicing forgiveness, practicing self-awareness, knowing what your triggers are, you know, so that when you're approaching a conversation, you're able to say, okay, you know what, I need to take a step back because I'm beginning to be triggered. I'm not going to be as effective in communicating. I need to practice forgiveness. Practicing all of those things, I think, will help to remedy this issue.
Ashe, Ashe. What about you, King Jacoby? You need me to repeat it?
Yes, I fully agree with that.
Okay.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Did you want me to repeat it or do you have it from here?
Yeah, I have it from here.
Okay. Ashe.
As well. So I mean, I fully agree with what Queen Kendra said. Basically, I feel as though the main thing is that along with that, along with just improving yourself on personal bad character traits, maybe the main thing I feel like is we need more dialogue between our youth and our elders. And you know, events like this is a start, but more so on a large scale is what we need, because there are a lot more youth voices that need to be communicated with voices from our elders. So whether that's like a social media platform, or a larger Zoom call, or maybe an in-person event, we need more time spent communicating with our elders, because that's something we are lacking as a community. And that's something that was designed, that was designed from the beginning, all the way back in slavery days, where families were stripped apart. They did that for a reason, because they knew if we communicate, what would happen, as we see. So basically, it's just communication. It's a dialogue. I feel as though if the elders feel disrespected from the younger generation as a whole, then we really need to figure out why that is, because that's something that will hurt me if I feel like my elders feel that I'm disrespecting them. So I feel like the generation as a whole, we need to figure that out, and just talk it out and resolve it.
Ashe, Ashe. Okay, Baba say we're going to end with your wisdom.
Well, I think we need to focus. I think Queen Kendra mentioned something that was critical. She said triggers, buttons and triggers. When you love somebody, or when you love your people, you love your elders, the elders love their youth, you have to be mindful of buttons and triggers, because just our experience in America, we've been traumatized in so many ways. You know, Black males have in many ways been emasculated in terms of economics, not being able to provide for their families. So obviously when you're talking to a Black male who may have fell a little short in being able to be that great provider, that's a very sensitive area for him. So if you're having an intense conversation about something, you got to be mindful of where his soft spot is, or his that button or that trigger, and you have to be careful about that. That's in any relationship. When you love somebody, you stay away from those buttons. You can communicate thoughts and ideas without pressing those buttons, because when you do that, then you reinvigorate the pain that they and the trauma that they experience. Obviously, they don't feel good about not being able to, the Black male is the first one fired, the last one hired. In a society where money means everything, to have the least amount of it, that makes you the lowest on the totem pole. And the sisters are sometimes impatient with that. But that's by design, as you stated in the form of the question. This is by design. So you have to keep that in mind, that the design is to tear you apart through all of these methods. So when we communicate with one another, we have to be mindful of the objectives of the enemy, or the objectives of our oppressors. That this thing is about competition, and you never expect your competitor to help you win. That's something that you're going to have to take the initiative to do for yourself. So I would say, moving forward, that we as a people are going to have to be, put love first and then be mindful of the triggers and the buttons that we have in terms of communicating with one another. Stay away from those, and I think we can make a lot of progress in terms of understanding where each other is coming from.
Ashe. So we have come to the end of our show, and I just want to say, Duwa'u, thank you very much for everyone on the panel, Baba Saba, Queen Kendra, and King Jacoby. I appreciate you all coming on to share your views and your perceptions. And I know that people will learn from this, and then we begin to have a dialogue, because actually it needs to get started so that we can continue with what we need to do. So I think that's important, and I'm glad that we did so. I also want to take out time to again thank our Baba Saba, the founder of the Temple of KitiHeru. I also want to say dua to our Chief Saba, Pianki Patah Matula Nefer Umu Ra. Also dua to our elders, Queen Regina Dennis Nana, and our elder Rini Ankh Makaru. Dua to our Saba Kimra Nasu Sheka Ma'at. Dua to my parents, Princella and Roy Small, for my existence into the universe. Dua to our Dr. Raketi Amin for her wonderful teachings of the Metanetter. Dua to all of the Temple of KitiHeru members and supporters. And dua to our audience who joins us on a regular basis. We appreciate your support. And we hope that we are edifying, educating, empowering, and also enlightening you on a lot of issues. Ashe. Also, I want to say dua to our children in our community, who of course we need to make sure that they're okay, so that everything that we're teaching can go on and to all our other generations, so our work that we do will not be in vain. Ashe.
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 And so with that being said, I want to say also that Black History Month is every day for us, every day, all day, 365 days of the year. Ashe.
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 So I want to say Shem Imhotep, which means go in peace.
Shem Imhotep.
Imhotep.
Shem Imhotep.
Voices of Maat. Voices of Maat will evoke truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity, balance, order, to be conscious, gifted, and black. Conscious, gifted,